passed around from nowadays, our parents are working. So even though they looked after their grandparents once they died, our parents were working. I mean, they couldn't even look after grandchildren, let alone grandparents. The increase in knowledge, medicines, life-saving equipment means we're living longer, but with plenty of comorbidities. When I started nursing, lots of my patients were in their 60s. They'd come in because they'd had heart attacks, strokes, orthopedic operations, surgery of some sort, and infections. I'm still nursing those same people now, 30 years later. They didn't die as they used to in their 60s and 70s. We saved them all. And so now they're very, very old and coming into hospital with 101 things wrong with them. They've got a long list of organ failures, blood pressure, diabetes, arthritis, and lots of dementia. And all of this is necessitating lots and lots of pills, lots of side effects from these pills, and very strong pain relief is needed. Okay, so now when you're getting old, your children do not have you in the home. Daughter-in-law usually doesn't get on with you, or son-in-law, or whatever. And as my mother said, there was no way on God's earth that she wanted to come and live with any of us. She was quite happy for us to entertain her, but she wanted her independence. She did not want to come and live with any of us, even though all three of her children offered. So what are your options? This is dependent on family, friends, social and medical services, but most importantly, money. Are we able to stay in our own homes? Do we own our own homes? Or are we still paying rent? What are the support services? Now, the government has recently worked out that it costs a hell of a lot of money to keep people in nursing homes. So they've made all these wonderful packages so that you can remain in your own home. Now, this can be very isolating because, yes, the nurse comes in, Meals on Wheels comes in, the housekeeper comes in, the gardener comes in, all these wonderful packages, but it's very lonely. If you want to stay in your own home, you change the building. You put in a few things like ramps. Hopefully you're all on one level and somebody comes in and makes sure it's safe. And they've got all the aged care modern cons, you know, the toilet's elevated because you don't actually sit on the toilet. You sit on a chair that is wheeled on top of that toilet. Your gas and electrical supplies are all adjusted, and you can live in your own homes. Sometimes this is good. Sometimes it's very isolating. Your children promise to come and see you and look after you. They're busy. They have their own kids and their own lives. So it can be very, very isolating and very lonely. But you're in your own home with your own beautiful possessions around you. Okay, so if that's not working out, the next step, you can go into communal living where you're independent, but you're sort of in an old age village where there's not exactly any nursing attached to that, but you're with other older people and you've got a communal hall and communal activities if you want to join in. From that, some of them go on and they have a nursing home so that you can graduate to the nursing home where you're not quite as individual. In fact, you've left your beautiful home. If you're lucky or unlucky, however you look at it, you have a room on your own. My mother moved into a suite, and I'll explain how all of that happened. It was quite traumatic, but anyway, Mum moved into a suite. So she came from her lovely home with all her beautiful possessions, one bedroom plus and an ensuite and sort of like a sitting room. So she had to choose what possessions she wanted around her. And of course, she wasn't allowed to have carpets. Her beautiful tin-sin carpets she couldn't have because nursing homes don't allow that. It's you can trip and fall. Mum found it very difficult, this sort of communal living. However, went at one of her hospital stays, and she paid oodles of money to have this beautiful room. I think at the time it was about $850,000 for the room. And she had her independence, luckily. One of Mum's hospital visits, she was in a room with 6 other people, and she loved it, absolutely loved it. The 6 other people, they all had visitors coming. They all could natter to each other. They could all talk about their pills and all the rest of it from their beds. Mum thought it was the most wonderful thing, and we had just spent a fortune getting her beautiful environment of a single room. Okay, old age today, and I'm talking about before COVID. My mother's history. She was born in Shanghai of English parents. Married my father, who after the war in Singapore, so we came to Australia in 1967. When my father died, my mother was, she virtually came to live with us for 2 years. She had never been on her own, even in the, in camp under the Japanese. She'd always had people around her. There were 27 in her room, and Mum did not cope at all well with being on her own. She was always being very thrifty and put money aside for her old age, which was good. In fact, the financial advisor, Mum was chatting away about different things, and she kept saying, oh no, in my old age. And it took him to say to her, well, Elaine, you're actually in your old age. So she allowed herself a few more privileges. Mum, when she married David, after my father died, they moved into this communal living with elderly people, and they all kept an eye on each other, but there was no nursing services. David died, and what had happened was my husband got posted up to Brisbane, and David was very keen for my mother to move to Brisbane because he could get her away from, he made sure that the house they bought in Brisbane was miles and miles from where we lived, because he was very possessive of her and was sort of not very keen on the amount of time Mum wanted to spend with us. But anyway, I was delighted. He was lovely. He adored, well, no, I didn't like him, but anyway, he adored my mother. And she adored him, and they had a wonderful life together. And, we all recognised that. She had a very, very fulfilling life with him. He just said, yes, dear, anything she wanted, she got. But anyway, so 6 months later, we're back in Sydney. Job-wise, didn't go well up there. So David's as pleased as punch, and we're back down in Sydney. So they had very nice times. I used to meet up with my mother, and I would take her overseas with me. My brother had, he worked for the Australian Embassy as their doctor in Timor, Laos, Burma, and then the Solomons. So at Christmas time, I would get on the plane with Mum, and Mum was getting on. She was in her 80s, and my brother would say, well, Mum, you're to come over business class. And Mum said, not likely, I'm not spending all that money on a business class. So my brother said, oh, that's good. He said, when I inherit it all from you, Mum, I'll be doing first class. My mother flew business class from then onwards. And that was much better for her as an older person, that she could have her feet up. And when we arrived, she was still in good health. Mum was very mobile, and we went everywhere, to all the different places, not only where my brother was staying, but I also went on overseas trips with her. She had the church group, and we used to go to all different places that had some sort of church affiliation. So we did Egypt, Jerusalem, Jordan, Israel, Greece, Italy, and it was packed from start to finish with activities all day. We kept up with everything. Obviously, Mum couldn't do a lot of the walking, but we had little rests and cups of coffee, and we took, instead of walking, if we'd had enough, we'd get a local taxi and meet at the end. So Mum had a very full life, and we did a lot of travelling together, and it was lovely. On the Christmas that Mark, my brother, wasn't overseas and he could have it in Australia, we all met at the Gold Coast, and the grandchildren and everybody came up, and we all had wonderful, wonderful Christmases together. My mother definitely, the matriarch, and what she said went. She was very, very, very strong, very independent. Now, Mark being a doctor and me being a nurse, we could see Mum slowing down. I was getting phone calls from the other people that lived in the village, and they were saying, you know, if they didn't see Mum, they'd check on her and they'd find that she'd had a fall. And so they'd call the ambulance, and I would fly up from Sydney. And, you know, whatever happened, we'd sort it all out. And, you know, that was it. Anyway, it got to the stage where the thing was, living in the village, my mother had been extremely generous even after David died, in that she was always taking the other people, you know, for their medical appointments. She could drive, and she was taking them to all of their medical appointments or going shopping for the day or outing. So Mum contributed a lot. When it came her time, Mum was still driving. The car was pretty bashed about, but anyway, that was another thing. The rest of the village really didn't want to be responsible for Mum when she was falling and calling me and all the rest of it. So Mark and I had long conversations with my mother and said, look, Mum, this is the way things go. We know if you have a fall and you go to hospital, which you have been having, there's going to come a day when they say, we're not going to allow you to go home. We're going to put you in a nursing home. And there will be no choice. It'll be the nearest nursing home to wherever the hospital is that the ambulance took you to, and you will be lumped in, and, you know, you'll go on a waiting list if there's a single room, and, you know, it'll not be the nursing home of your choice. And Mum would sit there and she'd say, yes, I know all of that. Yes, I know. Yes, I understand. But not today. So as we couldn't move her. Christmas time, we were all lined up having our Christmas photos, and the next thing, Mum slumps. She's on the floor, and we could see she'd broken her wrist. So we got her into hospital. I was in aged care. I phoned up the residential manager, and I said, I know we've got a spare room with a suite. I'd like my mother to move in. So even though it was Christmas Day, that was all organised. Mum had no choice. I had to come back to work. I'd only got a few days off for Christmas. My brother flew, when Mum came out of the hospital, he flew her down to Sydney, and we moved her into where I was working. And she had this beautiful room with the ensuite plus the sitting room. And being the good daughter that I was, I got Mum all organised. I got her the orthopaedic, you know, the ones that came to visit. I got her on the list there. I got her on the dental list. I got her on all of these, the optometrists to come and see, etc., etc. No. Mum decided she wanted to choose her own specialists. So I had to get her off everybody's list, and I thought, right, that's fine. So because she chose her own specialists, I'm the driver. I'm the one who picks her up for her visits, and off we go. I'm working, by the way. Anyway, as time progressed, I worked less and less. I cut back my days. My son was also unwell, so between him and my mother, I'm going backwards and forwards. And eventually I gave up work. My mother did not sit still, even though she was in a wonderful nursing home. And I used to come to work early, and I'd sit and have breakfast with her, a cup of coffee before I started work, and make sure everything was all right. And then, you know, that was fine. I'd go to work, and Mum would ring me or get a message through that she's was in the shower and would I curl her hair for her at lunchtime. So lunchtime I'd go and get out the curlers and do mum's hair, and, you know, it was lovely having her there. On my days off, mum and I used to go to Peters of Kensington. We'd go out for coffee, we'd go for lunches, and mum was absolutely ecstatic because within walking distance of her nursing home, she could go to the Catholic Church, which was what she was. When she married David, he was the Uniting Church, and mum felt that the Uniting Church was a much friendlier, more social environment. Whereas if you didn't turn up for Mass on Sunday, the Catholics wouldn't know. But if you didn't turn up for the Uniting Church service, everybody would ring you up and they'd come round with a casserole or something in case you were sick. So mum used to do both services. So Sunday morning I had off. Actually, the whole of Sunday I had off because in the afternoon the nursing home put on a movie afternoon. So mum used to go to the movies in the afternoon, and maybe I'd have to front up in the evenings for something, but Sunday was pretty well taken care of. So my mother had what I would call a very good aged care environment. She stayed in, it was like a boutique hotel, beautiful surroundings, lovely gardens, very good food, and a daughter who took her out everywhere. My sister in Adelaide used to come and visit. The grandchildren used to visit, which was, you know, something that mum hadn't had. And my brother from overseas used to ring and he'd also visit. Mum died and everything sort of, you know, that all closed down for her. And I was then able to go back to full-time work in aged care. So mum's experience was fabulous, as it was for a lot of other people, but then they had money. At this point, I'd like to explain from the nursing point of view, it doesn't matter whether you're not-for-profit or a for-profit residence. The nursing staff get paid the same wage. So if you're working in a not-for-profit and it stinks and the furniture's old and whatever, that nurse gets paid the same amount to care for you as she did for my mother working in a beautiful environment. So as far as the nursing staff are concerned, there's no difference. There was a lot of nursing homes that weren't doing the right thing, and really quite dreadful things were happening. But they were a very small number, very dramatic. So we got all of the television, we saw it all on TV, the terrible things that were going on. But as I said, there was a very small number that this was happening to. 2019, in July, we had the Royal Commission came out with all their suggestions and everything that, you know, they said needed to be done. It's been awful, absolutely dreadful. The nursing staff that we have get, as I said, they're severely underpaid. They get the basic wage. You get very few white Australian Anglo-Saxon people going in for this profession. Most of our aged care carers are from Nepal, the Philippines, they're Thai, they're Indian, they're African, and they're Islander, and they work very, very hard. The one good thing about all of them is that they have great respect for their elders. That's part of their culture. They don't understand putting your grandmother into a nursing home because they come from families that care and you know, they look after their elders. To come out to Australia, and to get a job, the easiest thing is to do a 6 to 8 week course in your own country in aged care, and that gives you a certificate too. So these students come out to Australia. They've got a certificate too. They can get a job in aged care, and as a student, or depending on the visas that they get, the working visa, they can work 2 days a week. And the rest of the time, they're putting themselves through university and they're studying. Some of them are studying to be registered nurses, but a lot of them are studying to be lawyers or accountants or teachers, or, it's not necessarily as a registered nurse. And they work very, very hard. And once they graduate, they're gone. They've got a university degree, they're gone. So you've got this terrific turnover of staff all the time. Working 2 days a week to get the roster going is extremely difficult. But you manage. As I said, you've got a terrific number of students coming out. Now, to get into a nursing home, I guess what I should explain is looking at where my mother was and being as exhausted as I was, I thought, my God, this is wonderful. Why don't I come into aged care? I get my meals, I'm in a nice environment, entertainment is provided. Wonderful. The government's not going to support you. You have to prove that you need care. So that's good. You go into a nursing home and then the nursing home decides what sort of care you need. And that's called, you've got to conform to the aged care funding instrument. And the aged care funding instrument is putting down on paper all of your nursing needs and how long it takes you. So that's somebody's job to put down on paper, and the more you need, the more money the government will give you. So, or the more money the government will give the nursing home to look after you. So in essence, if you need a lot of money, if you've got lots of people with very high care needs, then you should have more staff. Now, those places that are running and they want to make money out of aged care don't necessarily provide the correct number of staff. There is no formula for care needs and number of staff. If you have, like on my mother's level where she was, everybody was up and about. Yes, they might need somebody to, if they had dementia, but a lot of people have dementia, but you can be socially acceptable. It's when you get to be socially unacceptable, like you're peeing in the flower pots or you're being abusive, you go to a secure section. But if you've got dementia and you're just sweet-natured and you wander around and all you need is somebody to direct you and say, well, come on, let's go and it's lunchtime now, and take you to the dining room, otherwise you'd forget to eat. Or how about we have a shower? You haven't had a shower today. Those sorts of, it's to be looking after people like that. It's not very heavy nursing. The other extreme is where you are bedridden and you need to be fed and you're incontinent. And depending on your size, you might need two to assist for everything that you do. So you can see with the nursing care that to allocate numbers of residents to one nurse is completely different to according to how high their nursing needs are. And there's been no formula that's done that. So the ACT fee is pretty important. And the more you can fudge it, like if you were to test somebody in the morning and they wake out, they refuse to get out of bed and they're grumpy and they're not cooperating, you can get very high scores. The fact that by lunchtime they're hungry and they're in a much better mood and they're completely independent, obviously you do. The government says it's their nursing need, the nursing needs for the most amount of time. Well, if you're smart, you do it in the morning where you have to do everything for them and therefore you can get more money from the government. If you did it in the afternoon, they're completely independent and they don't need you at all. So there was a bit of a racket going on with that, I have to admit that. So yes, we did need a royal investigation as to what was going on. All that's come out of this Royal Commission, as far as I'm concerned, is that we now have to document everything. So long as you have got the correct forms, if you're saying that this person needs to be fed, so every day you, in their nursing notes and in their care plan, you have to do a proper care plan, and you have to do your nursing notes, and you have to update everything, and you put down needs to be fed. One person needs to feed them. The fact that they're not being fed has got nothing to do with it. As long as you've got that piece of paper that says the person needs to be fed, and you can prove to them that in your nursing notes they are being fed, the government is happy. This person might die of starvation, but that's got nothing to do with it. Instead of being at the bedside looking after somebody, turning them so that they don't get a pressure area, you're sitting at the computer and you're filling out the documentation that says that every 4 hours they're being turned. So I get very angry because all of this paperwork is taking up so much time from the nurses, the registered nurses, the care manager. We all have to make sure that the documentation is up to date. That's all that matters as far as getting you accredited and getting passed. So a lot more work for the nursing staff. No more time is being allocated. And the resident is, I don't think, being looked at. The ethics part comes into it. I think that the government's trying to do the right thing, and, the Royal Commission and all the rest of it. It's got the right idea, but, what happens? What actually happens? The other thing is I've worked for very big companies like Bupa and Opal, Catholic Care, Cranbrook Care, Uniting. There's a whole range of, and they might own, say, 70 nursing homes in the whole of Australia. We all know what's happened with Bupa, and they're actually pulling out of nursing care, out of nursing homes. They've had so many, they haven't been accredited, they've lost their accreditation, they've been closed down, and it's not worked for them. So everybody else is coming in and buying them up cheaply and hopefully getting the standard up. But, it takes a lot of documentation to do that. Every year, either the both the care manager and the residential manager is usually taken away, say 70, if they've got 70 nursing homes, the particular nursing, Opal or Uniting or wherever, they get all of the care managers from all over Australia, and they'll have the last one I went to was on the Gold Coast, and we stayed in an exclusive, absolutely wonderful accommodation. And we had our meeting over the weekend, and we discussed all sorts of things that were going on in, to improve nursing care and to chat with each other, all the care managers together coming up with, what was happening, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing that really annoyed me was that they were the organisation was so proud of the fact that they now had a quality improvements person on $200,000 a year, and that, the quality was really going to get better. And I'm thinking, if we had an extra $200,000 to spend, why don't we put it on the ground level for the nursing staff to get more nursing staff and to reimburse for the care that these nurses are given? So anyway, you can imagine with COVID, all the terrible things that, we've had to do with that. We've learnt from our mistakes. I think the Greek nursing home that had all the front, all the news, and they pulled out all the staff, And the doctors there said, but you can't do that. You can't pull out the staff. And they said, well, you know, they haven't been looking after them properly. Anyway, they pulled out the staff. They put new carers in. And those carers did not know the resident. And the number of residents that died through neglect, because your average everyday nurse knows, oh, look, if you sing to her, she'll open her mouth and you can put the food in. If you, if you give her a shower, if you give your residents, when you're cutting back, instead of having a shower every day, we can have second daily showers. That'll free up a bit more time so that at breakfast I can spend a lot longer actually putting food in somebody's mouth. So with all of that, those little caring things that the nursing staff know about, because they know the individual, you bring a whole lot of new staff in who don't know anybody, and it's... Now, how do we get away from the bad side? I don't want to leave you on that note. I mean, this is the things that go on. I mean, everybody's now got cameras, but in the nursing home, you cannot use the cameras unless you have a reason to do so. And I knew things weren't going well on night duty, so I started investigating through the cameras. And my God, the things that I saw, but I was never allowed to use them. And in fact, I got my knuckles rapped because I was against the law, in that why was I looking at the cameras when I didn't have a reason to look. It was just my suspicions. So we couldn't use any of that evidence. The fact that somebody was pushed over by a nursing staff, and then the nurse just promptly walked over the resident and continued walking, didn't come back for 5 minutes. But I wasn't allowed to do anything about that because it didn't follow the legal process. Unfortunately, when I've been an educator, and my message to my nurses is cover your backs. The lawyers will get you. Whatever you do, make sure that you have covered yourself legally. Make sure that your documentation is up to date, that you have done what the job description is, and that you haven't overstepped either what you're allowed to do or taken too long to the neglect of other residents. I mean, it's a very fine border. Honestly and truly, the nurses do a fabulous job. They really, really do. You're always going to get the one or two that are going to be sensational when they get caught out. But it is a very hard job. And I really would like to see more money put in at the ground level, not with your quality, what do they call them? Quality assessors, your clinical governance. Education, of course, is very important. Or, as I said, with the big companies where they've got everybody sitting in offices completely miles away from the actual residents, earning big bickies, is not the way to go. So even though I am so pleased that my mother died before COVID came in, because if she had not had access to her family and her grandchildren popping in, she would have been wretched, absolutely wretched. Anybody got any questions?
Oh my God, Jenny.
It puts us into a difficult position. Go on, Nellie, go on. Next.
I guess I'm wondering, why is that thinking so persistent that, they think that putting money at the top end and giving somebody 200,000, when COVID has shown how necessary it is to put money into the base, to have...
Because of legal matters.
The politics of it. I mean,
They covered themselves legally. If the company is going to be sued, they can say, no, you can't do that. Look, I have employed a quality improver and he's looking into it.
But don't people see that? Don't people see that this is how they can get around it? I mean, it makes me so mad. I want to
Money.
push
And there
and
are
bully
so
the bloody
many
problem.
nurses. It's not, you're not providing, you know, there are just so that the nursing staff is, and, you know, nurses in aged care get paid less than nurses in a hospital.
That's dreadful. It's so dreadful.
They should all be on the same. I mean, if you've got aged care is a specialty. Dealing with dementia is a specialty, but we get paid less than working in a hospital, which is your surgery or your orthopedic or your gynae or whatever.
Mm. So maybe the answer is that it should never be in private hands.
Well,
Too late.
I don't know about private hands being, I mean,
profit shouldn't be the bottom line. You know, I think we say something about ourselves as a community and a society, that this is just allowed to go on. And we have people like you with feet on the ground, who's able to say this is what's going on, and it's falling on deaf ears because money is being made.
I mean, I've had a wonderful time. I've been sent to regional areas.
Wonderful.
I've been, because I've been a contractor, I've been probably getting nearly twice what I would if I just stayed in the one. If I stayed here in Sydney and worked full time, I'm probably getting twice that when they send me to a regional area for 6 weeks to clean up the mess, because I know what I'm looking for and I know what the standards are and I know what has to be done. So they send me in to put out all these bushfires, but I know that when I leave, it's going to go back to nothing. They don't have the staff, they don't have the backup, they don't have the money.
It's infuriating to hear.
Yeah.
And it's it's also we say, as long as it looks good, we're fine. It's all about perception and not about reality.
But I still think that the responsibility is with family. The number of families that don't want mum living at home with them. And so they go and the way they show that they care is they complain about the nursing staff, that every single thing is wrong, that they go to the complaints department, and then we have hours and hours of paperwork to prove that, you know, whatever they said was wrong or that we're doing whatever we're doing.
Well, I had to put my mother into a nursing home. I'm, you know, the only family. I'm a single daughter, no other brothers and sisters. I'm working full time. I have a huge mortgage to pay. Then my parents get old and they get dementia. And I cannot look after them because I've got all this other stuff going on. So I think there must be other people out there who cannot just.
But at least you can visit them on the weekends.
Yes.
I have so many people that we call it granny dumping, and that's usually Christmas and Easter when they want to go on holiday. So granny dumping is when you take them to emergency and say, oh, she's got a cough, and that's it.
Oh,
and you go off on your holiday and they've got...
I know, it's awful.
So I think we should be nicer to our elderly. We should be more supportive of them. But you can't train people to be nice. So,
but you know how you said, Jenny, that your mum had to be told that she was now elderly.
Yeah.
Well, so are we.
Yeah. I know.
We're there.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, I'm 75. I'm 75.
And we've got the baby boomers coming in now. And what do the baby boomers want? They want everything and they want it now.
Yes.
Not tomorrow, now. So when I'm looking after, when I was at Griffith, I went there for 6 weeks and they asked me, I'm very lucky in that everywhere I've gone, they've asked me to go permanent and then they've asked me to extend my time, etc. So I'm obviously doing a good job, which gives me great satisfaction. I'm making a difference. But on the roster, there's supposed to be 10 nurses to turn up for the morning shift. There was about 65 residents. So 10 nurses should turn up. I was lucky to get 4. Night duty.
Because there's no money?
Sorry?
4 because there's no money, or 4 because 6 are ill?
Well, with COVID on, there was a terrific lurk going that you're supposed to work, the 2 days a week. However, the government had whatever that assistance was, that if instead of working 5 days a week, you could only work 2, they would pay you 3 days a week. So for students and who were getting paid for 3 days for not working, why would they bother turning up to work for 2 days? Can you understand that? And the other thing was, because of COVID, you couldn't work in 2 nursing homes.
Yes.
So you could only work in 1, and of course you couldn't get all the shifts you wanted. And of course, being regional, there was no agency, so there was no backup.
We've got a lot of work to do.
It's a lot of heavy
guns. I want to know if they provide guns in the drawer where the Bible is.
Sorry?
I want to know if they provide guns in the drawer where the Bible is.
Provide
Guns.
No, I want a little black pill.
Yes, I think the pills are the way to go.
Yeah.
A good bottle of wine in the stash and a good stash of pills.
Yes. See, Mum was able to have her wine and her chocolate. She was very happy. But we made sure that she was well looked after. But even that place had your whingers who felt that there was not enough entertainment, that the Peggy, the entertainers, what do we call them? The activities.
Occupational health.
Yeah.
The activities, was not providing enough diversity.
Yeah.
So, you can never please everybody all of the, only some of the times. And if people are going to complain, they're going to complain. And, by complaining, that was their way of showing their mother that, they were taking an interest in her and, they were making sure that, the right thing was being done by them. The other thing that a lot of families have difficulties with is that I say this time and time again, we actually become their family. We are with them 24 hours a day. And so they will tell us things and we will advise them and we will look after them. And then the family comes and says, why hasn't Mum got her teeth in? And Mum hasn't got her teeth in because it hurts and daughter won't pay for the dentist. So she only has her teeth in when there's a meal, so when she has to chew her food. So we know we're the ones looking after Mum, but we're in trouble with the family because whenever they come, Mum hasn't got her teeth in. And we say, well, Mum takes them out.
Yes.
Well, then you should be there putting them back in. So, and it is hurtful when you come to visit your mum and Mum in her dementia doesn't recognise you and loves the male nurse that's been looking after her and is sweet-natured and it's you've got to be grown up and you've got to realise that when somebody's in care, other people, it's not just family. And you might be old, but you want your independence and you want to make your own decisions if you can. You don't want family telling you what to do.
Yes.
And then, of course, when you've got dementia, that's another ball game completely.
So, Jenny, given that you've been in this area for a long time and you've done a lot of very successful work, if you had your magic wand, how would you fix things? What would you do?
Well, I'd make sure that the people on the ground level, that there was more of them and that they got better paid and the job was rewarding. It is very rewarding.
Maybe valued. Maybe we ought to value those people who are working.
They are valued by
respect.
They are valued by the resident.
Yes, but we need to value them at a wider community
that
level.
causes more problems than the actual resident.
If I could add in my pre-bob in terms of my mother was before she retired an aged care nurse. Now what happened was, hi everybody. Okay. Now my mother was an aged care nurse, and I visited Montefiore. So and I believe that there is a gold standard model, which is the Montefiore system. I think it's based on that model in Toronto. So they brought it to Australia. So I'm very positive. But in the sense that most families whose culture is to value the old, I think there would be a change in, I guess, a new way of thinking. Maybe in our lifetime, we should care more for our children, our grandchildren. So you actually recreate the old culture where it is we don't. We double, the wife, the husband goes to work.
Yes. Husband goes to work or wife goes to work. Okay, husband goes to work. Wife also goes to work.
Yes.
She's not bringing up the children anymore. No. She's not looking after the grandparents anymore. So you've got your parents, grandparents going off into homes. You've got your children going off into care. So that we can earn enough money to build them a swimming pool in the backyard. There's, the family unit is not what it used to be.
No. Well, I beg to differ. I have seen young Michelle sacrifice her life, her profession, to look after the amazing mother. But that is
the exception.
Yes. And I've been that part of the journey. And what I've seen is just a fraction. She sacrificed literally her life to care for her mother. I'm not sure if I want my daughter or anybody, because sons have got their wives, it's harder. But when you've got daughters, I don't want any daughters.
I don't want my daughter looking after me. Oh my God. And, I have deliberately brought up my children not the way my mother brought me up. It's not that I was very blessed to have the parents that I did, and I loved them both dearly. Was my mother very good at getting the guilt going when, she wanted chocolate? Couldn't you just go and get the chocolate now? And you're thinking, my God, I just want to go home to bed. I've had you out all day and I'm exhausted. Yes, Mum, I'll go and get you the chocolate. There's a lot of guilt. I mean, I certainly, I look back now and I miss my mum. And I miss the time that I had with her. And yes, she pressed my buttons like she pressed my brother's buttons as well. But we miss her. We really miss her funny ways. And we were all so close.
I say good morning to my mother every morning. Messy house still trying to get it.
Yeah, I've got the photos up and I say good morning.
Got the funeral sort of thing. And at the back, very cheeky. So I will say, good morning to everyone.
Just say, I did care for my mum for a number of years as she aged, and she was never old. She passed away at 99. And it was only after 95 she really needed the extra care. Yeah, and I made that choice. Yes, I made that choice rather than put her into care. We discussed about it. And it worked out quite well. I did spend all the time looking after her.
Did you have a husband who supported you?
No, I didn't. He didn't support it at all. He was absolutely against it, which made it very difficult when everyone was all together. And anyhow, Mum did get bouts of pneumonia, so she'd be in hospital for a couple of weeks. And she'd off to Lady Davidson to be cared for, just to recoup before she came back home. Yeah. And I've seen all of those scenarios you talk about, seen the staff and issues long before this was made public, I was often thinking I should draw this to someone's attention because, the lack of staff there, particularly in the evenings, times where she, presses buttons and have to have help to get to the toilet, we have a cane. And so many conflicts of personality with some of the nursing staff. My mum was the easiest going, happy-go-lucky woman in the world, not
not like a lot of the elderly people who are very staid in their ways. My mum was a young person in her personality. And
she didn't have dementia.
No, she didn't have, no, not at all. She just had got less and less mobile. But, you know, there was a lot of conflict with nurses who had to do it this way and just wouldn't bend, or, you know, if you didn't like a particular...
It was quicker. They had
yes.
And they got huge workloads.
Yes, and they'd be working at the nursing home and then they would go off to their shifts at one of the main hospitals.
Yep.
So they'd be doing these back-to-back tasks for days on end, and it was very trying. So everybody then becomes tired and you know, not so happy.
And you
with
got
it.
sick leave.
Yes, and then the staffing levels would go down again, and the doctors were skint on the ground as well. You know, when you needed them, they were never readily available. And there was a couple of times where ambulance were needed immediately because nursing staff missed signs that someone was going downhill, and you know what it's like. They're okay to cope to a point, and then suddenly it's bang.
Yeah.
The worst sets in. So it's a very difficult situation, and you know the standard of care seems to vary so much between the actual homes.
Part of when I've been doing education, like I said, cover yourself from the lawyers, because that's literally what nursing is these days. It's you don't want to go to court. You don't want. I mean, you're a human being. You make mistakes. You're tired. So all nursing now is, and now all nursing practice, all nursing education is to make sure that it's legal proof.
I would like to see legal reform in terms of taxation. And families who are caring for an elderly relative or friend get a tax deduction, and the house is not taxed, because at the moment, if anyone pays you to live in your home, a portion of it becomes taxable. Capital gains tax, who knows? But the situation is we're going to make it more financially feasible and conducive, and it'll be an incentive for families to bring back an elderly relative, friend, family, whoever.
And lonely at home.
Yeah, it's very hard. It's very hard work. It's extremely demanding, and you get exhausted.
Yes, I have the privilege of seeing. I know it is tough, but it only happens. But I've seen in extended Chinese families overseas where a family member is part. Grandmother had a job, great-grandmother had a job, they were sweeping and they're looking after the little kids when they come home to school, and they just serve afternoon tea. I would like to have that job in my retirement, where I will serve afternoon tea for a group of 5 little kids, and they'll take me towards a nice retirement, and I'll be the tea lady. But people seem to treat anyone over the age of 75 like you're senile. Even our children, the moment you get involved, they think, Mom, you know nothing. But it's the culture. So somewhere, the culture's got to change, where being a senior is being also relevant. And because of that, all the people are seen as irrelevant, hence the aged care, and you shove them in. And nurses, when they're not being watched by cameras, they tend to be quite dismissive. I mean, I've done my time in nursing homes. I do activities and I'm full of life. But the situation is nurses are and need to be valued by family members, and family members must be rostered to have Sunday lunch or Sunday or Saturday dinner with their families in nursing homes. So I would like a proactive role. Well, because the cook is away. Yes, the chef's away. And yes, I've seen it. Yes,
Sunday wages.
Yes.
So two main problems I saw really was the malnutrition. And also, if people haven't finished eating, you know, within
those
days, everything's taken away. I mean, it'd be good for me because I'm skinny down a lot because I'm such a slow eater. But, you know, the food is just taken away regardless. And the other problem that I saw was that people, you know, some people with dementia who are yelling out all the time, they're in with other people.
Yes, I saw that.
And so sort of the other people then they end up dying from sleep deprivation. Well, I saw that sort of after Mum died because when she was in, it was good, you know. I mean, they kept just her there, but after she went, what was it, three bedrooms, 3 rooms, 3 beds, and there was really lovely man opposite because I'd go back, you know, for a couple of weeks to get Mum's things and everything, talking to him, and he was quite with it until there was a bloke moved in there, sort of down on the floor and constantly yelling, and you know, a really lovely guy opposite had died within weeks, something like that, because I know when I had to go along sort of for a memorial service, sort of for Mum, and 14 other people who died in that period, he was also one of them then. And I know that when Mum was in respite, because she's on the Central Coast, my house was very, very steep stairs on the top. She was at James Milson Village, and she was in the nursing unit. Whereas, in fact, after that, I did the impossible, got a 6-month lease in the retirement village, but then she got kicked out after a couple of months because she's my mother. My mother was expelled from school in 6th class. Join the club. and so, you know, she was swearing at people. So she got kicked out. But where she was so good, you know. There was a woman in the next room to her constantly yelling. Yes. And that really isn't accommodated for. And it is a really, you know, you imagine for us, that constant noise, day and night.
Yes.
There's the nursing staff.
Yes.
The nursing staff have to put up with
Well, I know, but the thing is that that's where people live. And day and night in a room, you know, with someone doing that. And it's just not taken into account. As I say that, and the food being taken away.
Alternative, Jane.
Well, I don't know. There must be some way that there's sort of separate nice accommodation, you know, to accommodate for the noise, because it's sort of you know, people screaming and yelling.
Okay, but why are they screaming? It's an unmet need.
Yes,
So
I know,
are
but
they
still,
in pain? Are they constipated? See, that would be the first things that I'm looking at, normal things. Do they have an infection?
Yeah, but still.
Because it is not normal for people to scream.
Oh, still about 3 lots of people.
Well, their needs were not being addressed.
That's then the other people around us. The residents.
But you cannot have people screaming. There's a reason for it.
Yeah, that's right.
They do, and they go.
And I guess that's the whole problem. That's what Peggy was saying. I mean, you know, and what Jenny was saying, what's the reason behind it? And you know, what is the culture really doing when we look at our aged care? And why do we even need aged care? Why isn't it part of the family structure? You know, why have we established this kind of a system?
40% of people don't go.
One of the things.
That's the question.
One of the things that's interesting is that this actually isn't new.
Sorry, Norm, want to say something? Go ahead, Norm.
This isn't actually new. We get most of our culture here. We've inherited it from the UK. There's a group based at Cambridge University, and it's known as the Cambridge Group. They've been operating for the last 40 years to investigate what ordinary people's lives were like for the previous 400 years since records were first kept. These early records were kept mainly by the church. And they would check addresses, they would check where people were living, they would check what people died of. A lot of these things were recorded. And for the last 40 years, these people have been tediously copying these records and drawing statistics from them. And what they found, much to their surprise, was in Russia, for example, the extended family traditionally was the normal thing, at least for the last few hundred years. It never was for the last 400 years in England. 400 years ago, they had to pass what was known as the Great Elizabethan Poor Law. And there had been other similar things before on a smaller scale. And what they found is that roughly at least from 1600, when they've got these records, in England, people never lived in extended families. And once they got married and the parents were widowed or whatever, they did not look after them. And that was the reason that they introduced workhouses. So in the main culture, this is not something new. It's terrible, but it's not something new. In what we've
People are living a lot longer now. Like when I first started.
Even that, they've checked that. Even that isn't true. The massive death rate amongst children is a myth. They've checked the funeral records. In fact, people, as long as you got through certain stages in life, people were living, at least not quite as old as they are now, but into their 60s and 70s were quite common. Not quite as good as now. And once you got to the stage where you were becoming really frail, then the death rate increased dramatically. You had far fewer really, really old people than we do now. People who are kept alive because of all the modern drugs and procedures. So they did die a bit early. But the people who lived to that traditional 70 years of age wasn't that much below what we have now, except when there was the plague or some huge pandemic or something like that. And interestingly, it was different in France. In France, they haven't done nearly as much work on this, but England had a pattern that was different from many other countries. And the idea that you did not take in, even if you was a widow or a widower, very rarely did they go and live with the children. It was amongst ordinary people.
I've not been my experience.
No,
But this is for 400 years of records in England, specifically England. They haven't checked Scotland, Wales, or Ireland.
Can I ask you, Norm, is that specifically because of, or do you think it could be that the Industrial Revolution had some sort of impact on that?
No, that's one of the things that they've investigated. It did have an influence on health, not because people lived more unhealthy lives in the city, but because it was overcrowded. Illnesses could spread more easily. The fact you had no sewage in the country, it wasn't so important that you just threw the rubbish out in the paddock. There was nowhere to throw the rubbish in the cities. So the Industrial Revolution had that effect. But no, that was. Give me 5 seconds and I can give you the name of the person who started all this research. I'll just go and find the book. I can't think of his name.
Good on you, Norm.
The problem is there was a change of culture in Britain. You had a Phoenician taking over in London, and that culture is anti-family, it's anti-marriage, it's very much exploit people to the max. And that's what we're getting now. The husband, the wife, they're busting themselves to try and pay a mortgage in a wealthy country like Australia. It's ridiculous. $1 million to get a home in Sydney, out in the western suburbs. It's crazy.
That's the person who started the Cambridge group. His name was Peter Laslett. He died a few years ago. And the book is called The World We Have Lost. And it is actually not the world we have lost, it's the England we have lost, because all their research has been on England. But it goes through a lot of myths. There's a couple of things in there that are controversial and some people disagree with, but nobody really disagrees with their figures because he describes himself as a sociological historian, and it is by looking at the society, looking at the things that sociologists look at, which essentially is records, to see what's happening. And nowadays they do research as well and go out and create their own records. But basically, this has been an issue. And one of the interesting things is that it's a common belief that back then huge numbers of people died of starvation. From what they can work out, lack of proper nourishment was a factor, but it made them liable to get diseases. So they tended not actually physically to starve to death, like you see from people who've got in a famine, who've got swollen tummies and skinny faces and all of that. That what's happening now, without making any excuses for it, the problem, and this may be why it's so hard to change, is that there's 400 years of tradition behind it, and maybe longer. They just don't know because the records weren't kept before that.
No, and Norm, what's his name, Peter, did he talk at all about cultural things that may have led to that, not having that extended family that other cultures around them had? Was there
no, not really, because what his interest is, it's a massive job they've been doing. If you can imagine going to all these little parish records, and they build them up. So there are certain towns or villages that have been very well studied, others are much less so, and some not at all. And there can be big gaps in the records because these are just the records that have survived through the centuries. Right. Many of them, of course, have been lost. No, he doesn't really go in for analysing what the reasons may be. At the current stage they're at, they're still collecting the information.
It would be interesting to do research on very old literature, for example, and writings. You might get some ideas through, poetry and stories. I wonder.
The probably, yeah. I mean, there are old what we'd call memoirs and records of families, and mainly for rich people, not for ordinary people.
Yeah.
What they're concentrating on is what they describe as ordinary people.
Yes.
They're not. They do look at their lords and ladies and so on, but that's not their real interest. They're interested in what was life like for ordinary people. Yeah, that's the sort of question they ask.
And if they lived in 2 rooms and had 10 kids, where would they put somebody else?
Well, that's part of the thing. And everybody was living on the breadline. Poverty. Almost everyone was very poor. Nearly everybody at some stage in their lives would be undernourished because of crop failure or something like that. It was a very fine balance as to, and there is one conjecture. It's got nothing from these people. There used to be a researcher, a physiologist at Sydney University. His name was Everett. I forget Arthur Everett. And he did some investigations into longevity. And he spent about 30 years of his life doing this research. And his research was all on rats. And what he discovered was that if you underfed the rats, not to the point where you starved them, but underfed them so they were skinny, they lived longer.
Yes.
And it became quite clear over the years. He did other things too, but that was his long-term lifetime research. And so that may be the fact that these people were undernourished may partly, and it's only a guess, may partly account for why they lived longer than we thought they did.
The tragedy that went on in England, they didn't have sugar and they had much better teeth. They had a much better diet.
Yes.
For so many years because of rationing.
Can I add something going back to the looking after the elderly here? One thing with Mum is, sometimes we go to community programs and do different things locally, and sometimes, you'd be offered the nurse to come home to our home to maybe dress a wound or just do some physio or something for Mum after she'd had, an injury. But the trouble with that system is you never get the same person. You get a different one every time. They give you a window of 4 or 5 hours when they're going to come, imagining that because she's elderly or not 100%, you're just going to sit and wait. And then when they do come, they're all different kinds of people. Like, they're not always, yes, they're not always the friendliest of people, which I think is one thing. If you're going to visit someone's home, I think they need to to pick and choose people with the personality to suit that task. But then they become critical. We had a couple that then became extremely critical of, oh, what's this doing here? Or what's that for? Or that shouldn't be here. Or can I see this, please? Like very intrusive people, which was, you know, none of that is very judgmental. And of course, when you get people like that, you don't want them in your home. So then that system, which is meant to help ease my life a little bit or give me an hour off to go and do something, you know, go for a run or whatever I want to do, you then don't want to take advantage of that because, one, I wouldn't want to leave mum with someone like that in my home. Two, I wouldn't trust someone like that in my home. And three, you just never got to know them. So there was no rapport built up, no looking forward to the visit. It became something you didn't look forward to. And yet they... and yet they tell, you know, they sell the system as being there to help us so that we can care at home, but it just falls down.
I've got a solution. If I was to do a PhD, I would have a community centre or senior centre with activities from 7 o'clock to 7 p.m. And dinner would be soup and sourdough, a light meal, and then the bus will take everybody home after a day of fulfilling activities. So I will be doing Tai Chi and exercise in the morning. Then we'll do crafts. And then after lunch, will be healing, storytelling. So I would actually have the order of service and the life story ready to go. So at the... Mom doesn't have to join, but I think for people who want to be engaged,
You put mum on the couch, she can go to sleep.
So for all of us, on a positive note, we'll be thoroughly engaged attending PAVE once a month, and then my ADRA, and then my MDN sessions, which I'm conducting on a Monday, and being a qualified diversional therapist and activities officer, I will have you engaged from morning till night in all my activities and societies and dinners, sunset soirees, non-stop. Yes, so there you go. There. So,
Can I add there? As I was mentioning, the nurses coming and going from the home, and where I live, there's a unit block where a lot of elderly people live independently, just in a normal residential apartment block. But the Meals on Wheels staff, they have the same staff come and deliver the meals every day of the week. And the people I know, like the elderly people I know, they look forward to the visit. They enjoy it so much. It becomes more than delivering a meal. An hour later, they might come back. Yes, the friendship, the helping hand, and the beautiful, you know, the beautiful love you see between these people. Yes, whereas there's no reason that couldn't happen with the nursing staff.
Yes, it is, because they've got 20 people to attend to in 6 hours.
Exactly, that's right. But if we had more staff and they were paid to do this well, it could be turned around.
But it's interesting because, I mean, the Meals on Wheels people aren't paid. And so, you know...
most Meals on Wheels people are paid nowadays. Most of them are fully semi-professionalised. They were also told, I went out one day on one of those runs, and it was really interesting because what they were instructed, the people with the Meals on Wheels, was that they would walk into a place and for two reasons, which I'll give them in a second, they were told never actually to stop. They walk in, talk to the people while they're walking in, take the old plates and things from yesterday or whatever, dishes, and bring the new food out, maybe put it in the fridge if necessary, and walk out. And they were told very specifically, don't fall into the trap of stopping and talking. And the reason you can talk while you're there, but the reason was that these people are very lonely and they want to talk, and you have 15 more people waiting for your delivery. And if you spend 15 minutes talking to this one person, you're taking it away from all the others. This was one of the places that used volunteers, which is getting rarer now for exactly the same reason that you mentioned earlier, and that is that they now have to meet certain standards of food preparation, cleanliness, all of this, and fill out all the necessary forms, which isn't what volunteers normally would do.
You know, it's interesting because it seems as though, you know, for the sake of accountability, and this is all about accountability, legal accountability and otherwise, we have actually let go of the actual experiential side of life where we can share, and the relationship side seems to be what suffers as a result of accountability.
And that's what
And it's important. You know, you just think, well, you know, I mean, they can just as easily turn us all into little robots and have tick box approaches, and we'd have absolutely no relationship of any quality as a human being. It's just crazy. And I just don't, I'm disappointed because I've got a grandson who's 18 and my youngest is 9. And I can honestly say that I'm incredibly disappointed that where we had the opportunity to actually turn the world into a better place after the war, I don't know that we've done such a fantastic job. And it just, I don't know that it's anybody's fault. I don't know whether this is a phase that we're going to get through, but I think that all we can do is to really value relationships and to insist on having relationships that matter and that are meaningful.
Yes.
And also, I was just going to say, we also need to come up with new models.
Well,
and I mean, I think
relationships that are meaningful.
Yeah, well, that's right. But I mean, we have a stake in this. They're not too far off, you know. So we need to design our own.
We will sell our multi. We're all millionaires on paper.
Yes.
We will sell our multi-million, buy a mansion like Eula's house. It would be like the best exotic marigold hotel in Sydney. And we've got a nurse, we've got diversional therapies, activities, we've got a public speaker, we've got Ashley to play music, we've got a big garden to tell us stories and numbers and theology.
Just, look, I'm just mindful of the time. I want to really thank Jenny. It's been a wonderful session and we've had a terrific opportunity to actually look at this area, which I think is of vital significance and certainly an area that we're going to be facing on a personal level, each of us, very soon. And so before we just go, I just want to give the people on the Zoom, thank you very much for coming in. Leslie, do you want to say anything more before we go?
Can Jenny provide us all with a black pill before she retires?
I'll let Jenny answer that one.
Oh no, I'm sure the lawyers would have something to say about that.
Well, I'm not sure that you actually gave us much hope. I thought you were going to give us some hope, but what? It sounds dreadful. I knew it was dreadful. And what about people, a lot of people, I don't have children. I don't have any family here. So basically, unless if I outlive all my friends, or they'll probably be too old to visit me if I don't outlive them. So chances are I'm going to be on my own. And that's just...
Leslie?
Yes.
There's a series streaming on Netflix, I think, called Mary Kills People. It could be on Netflix or SBS.
Oh, I've seen them advertising that on SBS.
Yes, I think I'm going to start watching that and hope America comes into our lives.
I don't have a black pill, but I can give you the name of a book. It's called Final Exit by Derek Humphrey.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Final
Okay,
exit.
Vivi, do you have anything more to say before we go, please?
No, not really. It's as Leslie says, it's a bit depressing because, like her, I don't have any family, and
you need to do one of those documents, those legal documents that tell people how you want your life to end and what you want to happen.
No, but you don't always have the choice. You don't always have the choice.
no.
Well, we do it now while we have our
Faculty.
I know, but sometimes, anyway, that's another topic.
Well,
Yes, thank you for that.
We signed the petition to put the voluntary euthanasia to get it through the Senate, so hopefully it will.
Well, there you go. Jules, have you got something to say before we go?
Yes, very thought-provoking.
I can't
Lots to
hear very
think
well.
about, because I too find myself denying that I have been around the sun many times, that I've had many, many birthdays. So yes, very thought-provoking and very, yes, interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Ellie, anything further?
No, darling, I think, yes, it just really makes me angry, and it wants me to, I feel like I need to get active or participate or really get involved in something like this. And I'm sitting here thinking, I'm going to go to my local nursing home and visit people. A friend of mine did that round the corner. He's the most gorgeous old gentleman. And he would just go to be and visit people. Maybe that's a really lovely thing to do.
Yes.
I think I'm going to head down that road.
Yes. Well, I'm glad that it's at least inspired you to do something. Normie, last one from you. Anything further to say?
No. I think I said enough.
Okay. I don't know what happened to Rod. Rod seems to have disappeared, but, you know, thank you, Rod. Enki, you haven't said anything so far. Do you want to say anything before we go?
Yes.
It's good to have some young people here.
It's a really interesting topic. Thank you very much. And about in relation to the topic, I just say one sentence. In my culture, my background is Mongolia. In my cultures, of course, it's very different, like really extended family. And we are looking forward, the government and the current organizations looking forward to establish the kind of the senior center. So it was a really interesting talk to listen. Good experience. Thank you.
Okay, Paul, do you want to say anything? Peter?
Yeah, I'm optimistic. One of Australia's great strengths is heart, the way we care for each other. And I think that will eventually override the politics, the lawyers, whether it's worth votes or not. We'll get
Here. That's exactly my point. Yes. Actually, last one from you.
Just to say that today, I believe the nurses were striking out here.
Yes.
So hopefully they might get some luck.
Yes. Yes. Jenny, many thanks. It's been a wonderful
Thank you for listening.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next meeting.
Yes.
And I'll send you some details about who will be our guest speaker. We need to confirm the guest speaker. It'll probably be Nellie Kim, and she's a really interesting young lady. And I think, like Adra, PAVE needs to bring in some young people, and Nellie is going to be our first one. So we'll see how we go. Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Lovely evening, everyone.
Bye.
That was so good.
Now, just before you go, I've got to somehow turn this off. I don't quite know how I'm going to do that. Escape. Right, and we just go here and we say, I've got to go. And here we go. End meeting, leave meeting.